Hello students, this is Melis. Today I have come up with a topic, as you can see from the board. It is about active versus passive. In this discussion we're going to see the word of active and passive, and we'll see why we use passive forms over active, and then we'll see how to change active sentences to passive. And before that, of course, we'll see which verbs or which verb types take or have a passive form, and later we'll see the rules of change active to passive, and at the end we'll see some special cases about passive. Okay, we'll see some special cases. Okay, let's kick off the discussion. Well, a verb is said to be inactive if its subject is a doer. Okay, a verb is said to be in active voice. Okay, a verb is said to be inactive if its subject is a doer. Okay. If its subject is a doer, a verb is said to be, or a sentence is said to be in active, and a sentence is said to be in passive. A sentence is said to be in passive voice. A sentence said to be in passive voice if its subject receives an action or if its subject is the victim of an action. A verb is said to be in passive if its subject is a victim of the action. Okay, a victim of an action, or if the subject is a receiver. Okay, if the subject is a receiver, we say the the verb is in passive. Okay, the verb is in passive if the subject is the receiver or a victim, or it is a part of the sentence which is acted upon. Now let's see why we use passive over active. Why passive over active? So there are certain cases that forces us to use only passive, not active. What are those cases? Why passive? We'll ask this question. Why passive? The first case that forces us to use passive is when we don't know the doer of an action, or when the doer of an action is unknown. Okay, when doer of an action is not known, or when it is unknown, we use passive form of verbs, not active, because we have no option but to express what is done, because we don't know who does an action. And the second case that forces us to use only passive, or the second case that we are compelled to use only passive form is over active, is when we want to give emphasis to the action done than the doer of the action. This is a second case when an emphasis is given to the action done than the doer of the action. We choose passive verbs over active. And the third, which is not obligatory but optional case that we might use passive over active, is when we want to make the doer sacred, okay? And to keep the doer sacred, to keep the doer safe, we don't want to mention his or her name, but we mention what he or she does. So to make the doer sacred. That's a third and optional case, but the first two are obligatory because these are the must passive use case as far as passive verbs are concerned. Now, this being the cases which forces us to use only passive. Now, the next point would be what kind of verbs would have passive form? Do all verbs have passive form? That's our question. So it is not all verbs that has passive form, but only a certain group of verbs. Now, which verb would have passive form? The first case, or the first instance that we have to check to change active sentences to passive, is to check whether the main verb is transitive or not. So let's talk about verbs a little bit. Okay, a verb, as you know, expresses either an action or a state. A verb expresses either an action or states. So we have action verbs and state verbs. Again, we have regular verbs, irregular verbs. But based on the function that they have in sentence, verbs might be divided into three based on the function they have. Some verbs are transitive, some verbs are intransitive, some verbs are linking. Okay, so among these uses of verbs, which use would have passive form? Only the first form, or only transitive verbs would have passive form. Why? Because transitive verbs take an object, whereas intransitive and linking verbs don't take an object. Intransitive verb does not transfer an action from doer to receiver. There is no receiver in the case of intransitive verbs. Linking verbs are verbs that link or join the subject part with the other part, like verb to be, like is, are, and verbs like appears, seems, looks. Such verbs are linking verbs. They link the subject part with the other part. So these verbs are not transitive verbs, so they don't take an object and they don't have a passive form. So these two have no passive form. It is only transitive verbs that would have passive form because they takes an object. Okay, transitive verb takes an object, so this would have passive form. So it's only transitive verbs that would have passive form. Now, assuming we have a transitive verb, the next point would be, how do we change active sentences with transitive verbs to passive? That's our next issue. Okay, now let's try to change. Let me just pose an assumed or a hypothesis sentence with a transitive verb, okay, and an object. Okay, now assuming we have all the three elements of a sentence, the subject, the verb, and the object, this being the active sentence, How do we change this active sentence to passive? There are certain rules or procedures that we have to follow to change this active sentence to passive. What do we do first? The first thing that we have to do is to make the object of the active subject for the passive. Okay, the object of the active becomes subject for the passive, and next to that we use auxiliary verb to be. Okay, this time we use an auxiliary verb to be here. Okay, we use auxiliary verb to be. This is the third rule. And the next rule is we change the main verb, okay, the main verb of the active into its past participle form. So we change, in whatever form the active verb may be, we change it to past participle, to the third form. We are done here. We make the object of the active subject for the passive. We use auxiliary verb to be here, and we change the main verb of the active in whatever form it may be. We change it to past participle. We are done up to this point. But if you want to, we can continue expressing the doer. Okay, here. Okay, we can, which is not obligatory but optional. We can express the doer here. Okay, we bring up the doer using the preposition by, and we change the subject, this subject form to object form. Okay, so this is optional, but the obligatory rule is up to this point. Okay, so expressing the doer is not the objective or the aim of a passive sentence. The aim of the passive sentence is to stress the action done, not the doer of the action. So this is optional. Up to this point, that's obligatory rule. Now, one thing here which you have to note is the verb to be, okay, has to agree with the object of the active, which becomes subject for the passive in number, plus it has to agree in tense with the main verb of the active sentence. How? Let's see. Okay, so this verb to be has to agree in two things. One, in number. Two, in tense. The verb to be that we use here has to agree in number with the object of active sentence. Okay, with the object of the active sentence. If the object of the active is singular, the verb to be that we are going to use here must be singular in number. If the object of the active is plural, the verb to be we use should be plural in number. So the verb to be varies in number with a variation of number of the object of the active sentence, because it is the object of the active that becomes subject for the passive. As there is a notion which says every subject has to agree in number with its verb. So the verb to be agrees in number with the object of the active sentence. The next agreement is about its tense. The verb to be's tense must vary with a variation of tense in the main verb of the active sentence. If the main verb of the active is expressing a present time, the verb to be that we use has to express a present time. If the main verb is in past, and the verb to be has to be past tense. And if the main verb of the active is in future tense, we use the future form of verb to be. So the verb to be varies in tense with a variation of tense in the main verb. So the verb to be agrees in tense with the tense of the main verb of the active sentence. Okay, of the active sentence. So keeping this agreement, we can do, or we can change any active sentence with assuming a transitive verb and having all these three elements to passive this way. Okay, let me rephrase. The object becomes subject. We use verb to be as an auxiliary verb, keeping these two agreements, and we change the main verb with the active to its past participle, and we are done up to this point. But if we want to express who does an action or who did the action, we can change the subject, or we can bring the subject into the object place for the passive sentence. But the focus in passive sentence is not who, but it is what is done. So up to this point we are done. Now let's see some examples. Okay, let's see some examples. She wrote a letter. She wrote a letter. Now this is typical example having all the three elements. As you can see, she is the subject of the sentence, wrote is a verb, and letter is an object. This is typically analogous to the given assumed sentence. So it is an active sentence. Okay, it is an active sentence. Now how do we change this active to passive? According to the procedure I just wrote above. Now let's try to change this active sentence to passive. So the object which says a letter becomes our subject. So the passive begins by the phrase a letter. Now let's see the number. A letter, it's singular, not a plural. So which makes the next auxiliary verb, which is about to come here, the verb to be, should be singular in number. How about its tense? To consider or to determine the tense of the verb to be, we look at the verb in the main clause. The verb in the main clause reads out wrote. So wrote is a past form of write, so which makes the verb to be past tense here. So the verb to be should be past in tense and should be singular in number, so it is was. A letter was. And the third rule says we change the main verb in whatever form it may be, we change it to past participle. So wrote is the main verb here, so the past participle form of wrote is written. We are done. We can stop here. So a letter was written. That's a past form. Okay. Let's add some more examples. She brought her exercise books. Now we have again all the three elements. The subject, which reads out she, that's the subject. Brought is the verb. Her exercise book, that's the object. Okay, so when we change this active sentence to passive, it is an active sentence. As you can see, it is an active sentence. So when we change this active sentence to passive, what do? We do like this. So the object which reads out her books becomes subject for the passive. So the passive sentence begins by the phrase her exercise book. Her exercise books. Now her exercise books is a noun phrase, and is it singular or plural? As you can see, it is a plural noun, which makes the verb to be, which is about to come here, plural in number. And as per to its tense, we look at the main verb of the active, which reads out brought. So brought is a past form of bring, so which makes the verb to be past in tense and plural in number. So were becomes our auxiliary verb to be. So her exercise books were, and the past participle form, the next step is to change the main verb to past participle. So the past participle form of brought is brought itself. So her exercise books were brought. That is the passive form. Okay, that is the passive form. So this way you can change whatever the tense may be. In any tense it comes, you can change active to passive using the procedures we talked or we discussed so far. Now let's see another example. Okay, let's see another example here. We can change the tense. Now I have used 2 times past tense verbs. You can change it to, you can use present tense, perfect tenses, continuous tenses, or progressive tenses, whatever the tense may be. As I have said before, we keep the procedure we discussed so far. Okay. Now let's see some special cases. How do we change questions, for example, interrogative sentences to passive? Okay. So let's have one typical example. This being our active sentence. Does she study English? Now, as you can see, we have a subject, a verb, and object. So this is an active sentence. Okay, this is an active sentence. So how do we change? And what makes this sentence different from the previous sentences we have seen is that this is an interrogative sentence, or it is a question. So to change the question, there are some stages that we have to pass through, or some steps. Step 1. First, change this interrogative sentence to declarative. Okay, declarative, avoiding the question word. So the declarative form of the sentence becomes: she studies English. Why studies? Because the question word is does, which shows the main verb is present tense, simple present tense. So we use the simple present tense form of the verb study. Because the subject is third person singular, we change Y to I and we add ES to show that the action is simple. So she studies English. That is the declarative form. Step 2. Okay. Step 2 is to change the declarative sentence to passive. Now, what would be the passive form of this declarative sentence? As we have said before, the object, which is English, becomes subject for the passive, and we use here verb to be. English is singular, studies is simple present tense, so we use the present form of verb to be and singular form of verb to be, that is. English is, and the past participle we change. In the third rule we change studies to past participle, that is studied. English is studied. That's a passive form for the declarative. Now, step 3 must be the passive form for the original given active interrogative sentence. So we change this back to question. Okay. Now, when you turn this back to question, it becomes: is English studied by her? Now we change she to her because this time we need it because it is a question. So is English studied by her? That is the passive form for the given interrogative active sentence. So this is the last statement that we use. And for those sentences or interrogative sentences which begin by relative pronouns like who, let's see one example again. Let me add one more example of interrogative sentence. Who posted, for example, who posted the letters? This is an active sentence. Who posted the letters? Now we can change this as usual as the above one. Okay, let's first turn this to a declarative. So the declarative form would be someone, because we don't know who. Someone must be our subject, because this time we use indefinite pronouns as subject as long as we don't know who performed this action. So the safest subject for the declarative sentence would be someone or somebody, indefinite pronoun. So someone posted the letters. This is a declarative form for the given interrogative sentence. Now next we change this to passive. So the passive form would be the letters is our subject for the passive. As you can see, it's a plural name or a plural noun, which makes the verb to be plural in number. Posted is a past tense, which makes the verb to be past. So past form of verb to be and plural form of verb to be would be were. The letters were, and the past participle form of posted is posted because it is a regular verb. Okay, posted. The letters were posted by someone, but the letters were posted. That is enough for us. Now the question form would be, this time we use another phrase which says by whom. By whom were the letters posted? This is the passive form for the given active form, which reads out who posted the letters. Who posted the letters. So this is how we change interrogative sentence to passive. Let's see some more. How do we change imperative sentences like infinitives or gerunds to passive, and wind up our discussion. Okay. You can pause the video and take the note if you want to. So the next thing would be, how do we change imperatives? Okay, imperative sentence, an ordered sentence like this one: shut the door. So how do we change this to passive? Shut the door. As we know, the subject for imperative sentence is understood, that is you shut the door. So you is the subject. It is obvious. We don't write it out or we don't speak it out in oral communication because it is understood. So how do we change this to passive? We use the verb late to change this. So late the door be shut. That is the passive form, this one. Okay, this is passive for the given active form. Okay, this is shut the door is an active sentence. Let the door be shut. That's the passive form for the given imperative sentence. And how do we change? Again, polite way of asking. That's again another form. If you come across sentence like please, say please get me a cup of water. Please get me a cup of water. I like novels being read. It's almost the same as we change progressive or continuous tenses. So I like novels being read. That is the passive form. With this, we wind up our discussion. If you have any question, comments, put it down below in the comment line. I will come up with answers and special cases if you have any question on this topic. For now, bye from me.